And I work for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. Welcome to the Sandwiching and History tour of the Fulk Building. I'd like to thank everybody at CJRW for allowing us to come in and tour their offices today and somewhat disrupt the middle of their day. So it's very nice of them to let us come in today. And I especially want to recognize Brenda Worm, who is not here today. She's on vacation. And also Bob Johnston, who has helped us out. And Bob has set up in several of the conference areas, including in this one, if you can see the TV monitor back here. There's a few time-lapse videos and other videos throughout the building for you to see today. And also Tommy Jameson of Jameson Architects, who was the principal architect for the rehabilitation of the Fulk Building. Thank all of those folks for their help today. And if you're an architect, this tour is worth 1 hour of HSW continuing education credit through the American Institute of Architects, and you may see me after the tour if you're interested in that credit. Constructed in 1900, the Fulk Building was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1986, and it's also a part of the Main Street Commercial Historic District, which consists of this 300 block of Main Street and was National Register listed in 2010. The building is a good example of the early 20th century commercial style, and it has Romanesque Revival style details. Before the present Fulk Building was constructed, the Herb Block, or Herb Building, occupied this site at the southwest corner of 3rd and Main Streets. The two-story Herb Block was built about 1877 and housed the law offices of Herb, Summerfield, and Herb. And that was brothers Newman and Jacob Herb and Marcus Summerfield, as well as Maxwell and Edmondson grocers. In the late 1880s, the Herb Block was remodeled with the addition of a 3rd story. Shortly thereafter, the Joe P. Quinn Dry Goods Company moved into the Herb Block. The company's shoe department even extended a little bit farther to the south into the previous building at 304 Main, which is next door, now the site of the C.M. Taylor Building. The officers of that company, of the Joe P. Quinn Dry Goods Company, were brothers Isaac, Joseph, and George Wolfe. 2 devastating fires would soon change the face of the 300 block of Main. At 4:30 a.m. on Friday, February 2nd, 1900, a fire started across the street at the Arkansas Book and Paper Company, then housed on the 2nd floor of the Rose Building, the predecessor of the current Rose Building, at 307 to 311 Main. The Book and Paper Company shared the 2nd floor of the Rose Building with the Dickinson Arms Company. Not good. The fire broke through the partitions between the businesses, and it spread to the munition company's store of dry powder. This resulted in a series of explosions that significantly damaged the entire east side of the 300 block, pretty well destroying everything. And it also shattered windows in every business all the way down to the 700 block of Main Street. Just 4 days later, on February 6th, 1900, the building that was here, the Herb Block at 300 to 302, and also 304 next door to the south, Those two buildings were destroyed by fire. An article in the Arkansas Gazette estimated that the Joe P. Quinn Dry Goods Company, which had been here, suffered a loss of $240,000, equal to almost $6.9 million today. At the time of the fire, the building here on the corner was owned by Judge Francis M. Fulk. And Fulk immediately rebuilt on the same site, constructing the present 3-story Fulk Building. And as I'm going through the history of the building, and I'll talk about the Fulk family a little bit, I want to mention that there are some Fulk family members here with us today. I know that 2 great-grandchildren of Francis Marion Fulk are here with us, and then some of their children. So Gus Fulk III is here, and then his first cousin, Virginia Fulk. Well, y'all, where are you guys? Back here, there's Virginia. Where's Gus? Right here. Okay. So I wanted to point them out as well. Thank you all for coming. Now, you're not going to be able to see some of these things I'm going to talk about, so just put this in your head for later when you go back outside and look at the outside of the building. But constructed in 1900, I told you already, the Fulk Building is a good example, early 20th century commercial style. Oh yeah, that's a good idea, look at that. With Romanesque Revival style details. That's the time lapse of the rehab of the building. You can look at it. So the main details that make it Romanesque Revival in style are the use of arcades and of arched window openings. The 3-story building is divided into 2 bays, so I'm right in the middle. So you have 300 on this side, and this was 302 historically on this side, on the south side. But right above us, on the front facade of the building, the bays are divided by a vertical row of rusticated brick. There's a pattern up there that divides the 2 bays. And that's also used on the north and south corners, this corner and this corner of the building, as a coin treatment on the outside. The building's cornice, up at the very top on the front exterior, includes a band of rectangular attic vents, topped by a projecting arcade of brick, as well as simple brick corbelling and dental work. You can see there on the monitor. The metal nameplate is centered in the upper facade and reads Fulk. The building features a mixture of rectangular and arched window openings with cast concrete lintels, sills, and keystones, and ribbons of windows on the 3rd floor, up on the front facade and right around the corner, are topped with arcades of rusticated brick. So that's the Romanesque Revival style details on the building. When the building first opened, this new building, in 1900-1901, the city directory lists the storefront at 300 Main, on this north side, was the Bank of Little Rock and the Little Rock Trust Company. And I've got some of these printouts. Everything I've got in my hand, I put out on this conference table and the 2 conference areas upstairs as well. So if you can't see it very well from where you're standing, there's an opportunity to see it later. This is from the 1900-1901 Little Rock City Directory, ads for the Bank of Little Rock and Little Rock Trust Company. Hold that for me. Thank you. And then this storefront at 302, the southern storefront initially, was occupied by Wolf & Brothers Dry Goods Company. And that's the reason why I mentioned that the Wolf Brothers were officers in the Joe P. Quinn Dry Goods Company that was in the herb block on this site. After that building burned, whenever Fulk rebuilt this in 1900, they decided to occupy the southern storefront, and they opened up their own dry goods business called Wolf & Brothers Dry Goods, same guys. Now about Francis M. Fulk. The namesake of the Fulk Building was one of Little Rock's wealthiest and best-known citizens. At the time of his death in 1910, he was one of the largest property owners in the city. Francis Marion Fulk was born January 9, 1852, at Locke, Ohio. When he was 4 years old, his family moved to Iowa. Fulk attended common schools and completed his education at Iowa Wesleyan University. Fulk taught school in Iowa and Missouri before 1870, when he moved to Monroe County, Arkansas. He continued to teach school and eventually moved to Wheatley in St. Francis County, where on August the 3rd, 1873, he married Miss Florence Mary Parsons. I'll show you a picture of Mr. Fulk. There's one of him. And again, this is throughout the building on the conference room tables. Yes, thank you, ladies. Thank you. Okay, so they got married. The couple moved to Little Rock later that year, 1873, and Mr. Fulk initially worked in the carpentry and masonry trades. He earned enough money to build a small stand in the market on 5th Street, now Capitol, between Maine and Louisiana. He was successful in this venture and later acquired a mercantile business at 9th and Victory Streets. Although Fulk was admitted to the bar in 1874, he didn't actively practice law until 1881. And about that same time, the early 1880s, he began to invest in real estate. In 1885, he, along with John B. Jones and W.B. Worthen, started the Little Rock Real Estate Exchange. Beginning in 1897, Fulk practiced law with his two sons, Francis Guy Fulk, and here's Francis Guy, and the younger son, Augustus Gus Marion Fulk Sr. So we've got Gus Fulk III here with us today. And their law firm was called appropriately Fulk, Fulk, and Fulk. Francis M. Fulk enjoyed an active law practice, served as circuit judge, and by 1910 amassed a large amount of property worth $1 million, equal to $25.6 million today. He owned the Jones House Furnishing Company in the 600 block of Maine. He owned the Fulk Building, obviously this one, southwest corner 3rd and Main. He had a building at the corner of 2nd and Main, a building on East Markham, what was known as the Fulk Office Building at 305 West Markham. And he also owned two 120-acre tracts of land west of downtown Little Rock, one west of Highland Park, which is in the West 12th Street neighborhood, and another west of the State Hospital on West Markham. And 500 lots scattered throughout the entire city, most of which were unimproved. And that's just a highlight of what he owned. He owned more than that. Judge Fulk's death was attributed to heart trouble. He died at the family home at 220 Spring Street on March 24th, 1910, at the age of 58. His body was interred in the Fulk Mausoleum at Oakland Cemetery. At the time of Fulk's death, his friends spoke very highly of him. Judge Joseph W. House, Sr. said, quote, "He was one of the best friends that a man could have and was a man of strict integrity. I have known him intimately for 21 years and have found him to be a man of remarkable ability, both as a businessman and as an attorney. He was always upright in his dealings with his fellow men, and I regret very much to hear the news of his death." Fulk's widow, Florence Parsons Fulk, managed the family's real estate interests until her death on January 9th, 1940, at the age of 84. Francis M. and Florence Fulk's two sons, who I showed you already, Francis Guy and Augustus Marion Sr., followed in their father's footsteps to become prominent Little Rock attorneys and circuit court judges. F. Guy Fulk died in 1934 at the age of 58, and his younger brother, Gus Fulk, died in 1954 at the age of 76. And I already told you the Fulk descendants that were here. In 1944, the Fulk Building was sold out of the family. Now I'm going to tell you about the other businesses that occupied this building. I already told you the first occupants in 1900, Bank of Little Rock and Little Rock Trust Company on this side, and Wolf and Brothers Dry Goods on this side, on the south side. Those tenants remained here until the mid-19-teens, and then at that time, 300 Main, the north side, became England Loan and Trust Company, and England National Bank, run by Joseph E. England, Lloyd England, and J. E. England, Jr. 302, the south side, then housed the A.B. Poe shoe store. The bank and shoe store remained here in the building through the mid-1920s. In 1927, the Fulk Building was remodeled. The original 2-over-2 windows were replaced with multi-pane casement windows, and the storefronts were altered with deeply recessed front doors. That's okay. Deeply recessed front doors flanked by large plate glass windows for storefront displays. 3 small storefronts, and I'll show you this as we go back on the first floor. 3 small storefronts were added to the building's northwest corner and fronted along West 3rd Street, having addresses of 107, 109, and 111 West 3rd. That's now their mail room back there on the side of the building. Interestingly, also on the north side of the building, in 1931, on the centennial anniversary of Little Rock's incorporation as a town, a commemorative plaque was placed on the north side of the Fulk Building. Some of you may have noticed it whenever you came in. It's right around the corner here from the front door. And it marks this corner as the site of the first meeting of the Little Rock Town Council in 1831. After housing financial institutions for almost 30 years, talking about the storefront at 300 Main was occupied by clothing and shoe stores for many years. In the 1930s, it was the J.B. Strauss and Company clothing store, followed in the 40s by Stein Brothers. By 1950, it was J.B. Strauss Company's men's store over here. And then by the mid-50s, it was Bell Brothers Shoes. They stayed here until the mid-60s. And then for another decade after that, it was the Hardy Shoe Store, all over here. This storefront had a tenant that remained much longer on the south side at 302 Main from the mid-1930s until the early 1970s. The south side was Bowman's Men's Shop. It was here for a long time. During the 1930s and 40s, the 2 storefronts, I'm talking about the ones I mentioned on West 3rd Street toward the back of the building. 2 storefronts at 107 to 109 West 3rd housed the Atlas Finance Company and Lasker and Baskin Jewelers. 111 West 3rd was home to a locksmith in the 30s. And in the 40s, it was Charles H. Brown who sold acoustic apparatus. Can you guess what that was? Yes, hearing aids. By the early 1950s, 111, storefront on the side, was Edmund C. Harper's liquor store. And I know they found a lot of glass bottles whenever they were doing the renovation, and I suspect those came from the liquor store. Beginning in the mid-1950s, Bowman's leased all 3 of the storefronts on West 3rd to make their space. They had 302, and then it wrapped around like a big L around the back to also have the entrance on West 3rd. But most people remember this site as the home of Bennetts Military Supplies. Before Bennetts moved to the Fulk Building, it was located on the west side of the 200 block, just to the north of us, where the parking lot is today. In another building that burned to the ground, forcing the businesses move over here to the Fulk Building, and they were occupied 302 at first and then expanded into the entire building. But they moved over here in the early 70s. So they were located at 302 Main from 1973 until 2014, when the store relocated a couple blocks to the south to 608 Main Street to make way for the rehabilitation of the Fulk Building. Sherry Meyer is the owner of Bennett's, and she inherited the business from her father, Joseph Kaufman, who died in 2003. In 2014 and 2015, Terraforma LLC, a real estate development firm owned by Doug and Sherry Meyer and Dave Bruning, rehabilitated the Fulk Building to house the offices of CJRW, the state's largest marketing, advertising, and public relations firm. Now about the Rehab. And you've seen, if you haven't been watching, or if you didn't get a chance to see it if you're in here, there's a full 1 minute long time-lapse video of the Rehab from beginning to end. Although Bennetts had been in the Fulk Building for more than 40 years, the second and third floors of the building remained empty. the before photos of that. I mean, there's nothing up there. There wasn't, except for the columns, no walls or anything, open space. And the building suffered from deferred maintenance. The Fulk Building was rehabilitated with the help of federal and state tax credits for the rehab of historic buildings. The project architect, in order to accommodate the advertising agency, the building needed a variety of open and closed office spaces, conference rooms, collaborative workspaces, along with improvements to meet modern building codes and modern office needs. So some highlights of the project include significant interior features were preserved where possible, including, and I'll point these out as we go through the building as well, the original iron columns, original wood ceilings, not in this part though, historic plaster walls with remnants of previous finishes preserved as is with a clear sealant, historic fire door up on the 3rd floor. The original corner entrance here was recreated in a conference room put here in the southern storefront. And I've got some old photos of the building to show you too. They're out on they're hard to see from far away, but they're out on the tables as well to show you the building with the corner entry and 2/2 windows. And then another one after that shows you after the 1920s remodel with casement windows and the different storefronts. So they recreated the original corner entry. One of the 3rd Street storefronts on this side was redefined as an entrance for staff and for deliveries, and that goes back to the mail room. The new hydraulic elevator was installed. 2 new fire stairs were installed to meet code. Structural improvements were made to the building. They improved the connections of the floor plates and the roof to the exterior envelope of the building. New roof, masonry repairs. The 1920s casement windows had been replaced in the early 21st century by fixed panes of plexiglass. And so they went back with replica 2/2 windows to match the originals. And those replica windows have insulated glass, and they were installed in the refurbished original window frames. The window trim was repaired and replaced where it was missing. They installed energy efficient lighting and high performance HVAC systems as well. CJRW, and I just learned this today, that CJRW moved into the building on July 9th, 2015. And I was told it took them only a few hours to get everything, to shut down business at the previous location, get over here, get everything started back up, get email up and running by like 4 o'clock that afternoon. Yeah, I mean, it took them a while after July 9th to get everything else, you know, the art hung and all that stuff, but they did it all in a couple hours. And they had an open house to show off the new space at the end of September 2015. Since then, the project has won 2 awards, an Award of Merit at the Quapaw Quarter Association's Greater Little Rock Preservation Awards. That was in October of 15. And the Award for Excellence in Preservation through Rehabilitation at the 2015 Arkansas Preservation Awards, which was just this past January. And, perfect that Tommy snuck in just then. I was about to say your name. In June, Tommy Jameson will submit the project for yet another statewide award for the Arkansas Chapter AIA 2016 Design Awards Program. So that's great. Okay, now just real quick, I'm going to give you a little bit of info about CJRW, and then we'll start going through the building floor by floor. Cranford Johnson Robinson Woods, CJRW, founded in 1961. The company serves clients inside and outside of Arkansas, and is the largest marketing and advertising communications firm in the Mid-South. CJRW offers a full range of advertising, public relations, public policy, and promotion support, including print, broadcast, and outdoor advertising, publication design and production, social media and digital capabilities, consumer and trade communications, media planning and buying, and consumer event coordination. In addition to its Little Rock office, CJRW also has an office in Springdale, and the firm employs a total of 76 people. All right, now we're going to try to go through the building together, floor by floor. So some things that you need to know are that the 2 stairwells that I mentioned, that's the fastest way to move throughout the building. The elevator is there for you if you need it, but it's a little bit slow. So I prefer that you use the stairs if you are able. There's 1 stairwell here off the lobby. The other one's on the far west end of the building. The restrooms are on every floor, also on the far west end of the building, if you need those. And you are not allowed to go in the basement. Not that anybody here would try that, but just in case. Don't do it, okay? Does anybody have questions for me before we start to look through the building?
What occupied the empty upper floors?
Nothing.
All these years?
She asked what occupied the empty upper floors. There was nothing there the time that, while Bennetts was here, they didn't have anything upstairs.
Before Bennetts was, though.
Before Bennetts, yeah, the business was used.
Thousands of pigeons.
Yeah, thousands of pigeons. Okay, one more announcement before we start. Hey guys, one more announcement before we start moving throughout the building. In case I lose, in case some of you have to leave for whatever reason, I wanted to announce the next tour, which is Friday, June 3rd at the Castle on Stagecoach, which I know is interesting to many of you. That's at 6601 Stagecoach Road in Little Rock. All right, now before we go, ma'am? Yes, there's plenty of parking out there on the grounds. We'll be out there helping you park. Yeah. Okay. This will make sense before we go back behind this wall. The whole building, total of 21,000 square feet, 7,000 square feet per floor. In the lobby, you've probably already admired, and many of you recognize that work to be of James Hayes, Pine Bluff artist James Hayes did the chandelier here in the lobby, and there's lots of local art throughout the building. You've seen the remodel video in conference room 1, and now we're going to go back through this door and talk about the rest of the first floor.